Welcome back talking with a lot of them. Starting off, I think one of the biggest ones that we saw was the Carolina Panthers beating the Las Vegas Raiders 36 to 22 with Andy Dalton as their quarterback.
Yeah, how did you like that? They just benched Bryce Young, brought in Andy Dalton, and then obviously the Las Vegas Raiders have not been doing so great lately. But I still don't think people really expected the Panthers to win. It was a great start for the season for Andy Dalton, though, and they were able to get the win.
Yeah, no, and after the win like this, you have to wonder, does Bryce Young even come back for the Carolina Panthers? I mean, there's been a lot of rumors going around that teams have been wanting to trade for Bryce Young, and I do think Bryce Young is a great quarterback. I just don't think the Carolina Panthers fit him as what they're at right now. I mean, we've seen it with Baker Mayfield, we saw it with Sam Darnold, we've seen it with a lot of other Panther quarterbacks over the last couple of years. And I mean, a lot of it does fall on ownership because we've seen a lot of head coaches switch in and out of this position over the last couple of years when uh, David Tepper's took over. And it's really an issue that a lot of Carolinians have. And I mean, I can speak this personally because I have my girlfriend's family who's from the Carolinas and they hate them. So you have to think, is it going to be different ownership soon? Is it going to be different quarterbacks soon? Whatever the case may be. But yeah, huge turn of events for the Carolina Panthers going into last week. Up next, I think a lot of people were expecting the New York Giants to get demolished by the Cleveland Browns. I know certainly I was one of them, but yeah, man, Sean Watson, Cleveland Browns, they just do not look like anything that they were used to last year. I mean, we all thought the Cleveland Browns were going to be playoff team again this year. I mean, they saw last year how they went with Joe Flacco and all of them, but man, this team is with Deshaun Watson in the helm of the quarterback is not looking good. I think a lot of people are ready for Jameis Winston to take over that quarterback role for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I think so too. And then, like, obviously last year we saw Joe Flacco lead the Browns into the playoffs. He did pretty good with them. And then obviously Deshaun Watson was back. But the Giants, they started off pretty bad, but also like again, they were playing the Vikings and they got embarrassed. The Vikings we've seen have been doing really well. So it just kind of throws out the question as to whether the Giants are as bad as people thought that they would be this season, or if maybe they've improved and just have had some tough opponents. So it's very interesting, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do next when they go and match up against the Cowboys.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I mean, they've faced some good opponents here and there. I mean, like you said, the Vikings, who right now have one of the best defenses in the NFL right now. I mean, we saw them beat the Giants, we saw them beat the 49ers. We just saw them absolutely embarrass the Texans this week, which we'll talk about later on. But Brian Flores really has something going with that Vikings defense, and I wouldn't be shocked if, within the next year or sometime this year if he gets some calls like, "Hey, we need a head coach position. Like, would you be available for the head coaching position?" But the Giants, I mean, Daniel Jones really, I don't want to say he's been overperforming, but I think he's been performing at the level that a lot of people have been wanting to play at. And I think a lot of it falls on their rookie wide receiver, Malik Neighbors. I mean, you give him a receiver like Malik Neighbors, now he actually has a number one target that he can actually look for. I mean, granted, he does miss the ball with him here and there, but Malik Neighbors does actually make up for it. And with his elusiveness and his athleticism, that he's able to make those plays. I mean, we saw it twice in the end zone against the Cleveland Browns where Daniel Jones slightly overthrew the pass to him, but he was able just to snag the catch in for a touchdown. And man, I do think Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors are going to have a good chemistry going forward in this league. And if Daniel Jones does keep up the performance, I do think he might stick around just a little bit longer, which I'm not sure a lot of Giant fans agree with, but I do think that chemistry is starting to build up a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously the Chicago Bears took on the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts won 21 to 16, which was an upset because obviously Caleb Williams was drafted first by the Chicago Bears, came into the league, and people just expected him to dominate the league and do what he did when he was in college, which was lead them to a lot of success. And it just has not really worked out for the Bears lately. The Colts obviously have Anthony Richardson in the circle and then Jonathan Taylor, but the Bears still not able to pull off a win.
Yeah, and I mean, watching this game, I didn't really watch it a whole lot, but watching that game for the little bits that I did, I mean, both teams just look atrocious. I mean, the Bears, I mean, you still have a young team. I mean, you have Roma Dunze, you still have Caleb Williams, who's still a young quarterback. Running the ball isn't necessarily the strong point of that offense. I mean, DeAndre Swift really hasn't been doing a whole lot. And then same thing with the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, you still have Anthony Richardson who didn't play at all last season except for like the first 3 weeks. So he's still learning how to adjust to that NFL mentality and NFL speed. Um, I do think his accuracy needs to be ramped up a little bit because athletically he is as close to Cam Newton that you can get. Just if he can learn how to make throws, I think he'll be a Pro Bowl quarterback one day in the future. But right now, his accuracy is what's stopping the Colts from going any further down the road like that. And Caleb Williams, he had his first passing touchdown this week, so that was pretty cool to see. But Caleb Williams, I mean, just for where he's at right now and all the hype that he had going in behind him and how confident he was, I mean, for what he's showing right now, it really is underwhelming for a lot of Bears fans who had projections of going to the playoffs and doing this and doing that. But watching what's going on now with the Bears, I think it's more of a wake up call for Caleb Williams. Like, hey, this is the NFL. Like, you got to take things more seriously. This and that.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. So you said that Caleb Williams had his first passing touchdown this week, and his passing touchdown was actually to Rome Odunze. So who do you think keeps the ball?
Yeah, that's a good question, honestly, because it's kind of like the same thing with Jayden Daniels and that offensive tackle he threw the passing touchdown to. I'm gonna have to say it's probably going to go to Caleb Williams. But to be fair, I mean, Roma Dunde did catch the ball, so he probably has first dibs on wherever that ball does go to. But
But
it'll
Caleb
definitely be
Williams threw it.
yeah, no, it'll definitely be a conversation that I think will come out later in the weeks on who got to keep that first NFL rookie ball.
And then moving on, the Minnesota Vikings took down the Houston Texans in a crazy upset, 34 to 7. Nobody expected this. I think a lot of people were kind of leaning towards the Texans with CJ Stroud, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon to take down the Vikings. Obviously, Joe Mixon didn't play, but the Texans just have a stacked roster. And the Vikings, obviously, last season, they didn't do as good as they are doing this season. And people just kind of overlook them.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because I remember last week we were both talking about this particular game. And I was looking at that Minnesota Vikings defense and just what they did against the San Francisco 49ers. I did somewhat kind of see that the Vikings could upset the Texans. I just didn't think it would be a fashion where it was almost a 28-point game. Because like that's unbelievable with how good the Houston Texans offense is. I mean, you have Stephon Diggs, you have Nico Collins, you have, Tank Dell. I mean, granted, Joe Mixon didn't play, so your run offense wasn't spectacular, but you still have a really good defense with Derek Stingley, Will Anderson, the rookie cornerback they just picked up this draft. I'm trying to remember what his name is, but they all did really, really well this week. Kamari Lassiter, that's who it is. They all like that defense, like it's really good, but God, I mean, Minnesota Vikings really have something going on. That's something special. I mean, they have Jonathan Grenard there, who came from the Houston Texans, ironically. But yeah, I mean, it's just a really different defense with Brian Flores. I mean, with how he's scheming things and how he's running plays, it almost reminds me of the Baltimore Ravens last year with Mike McDonald. And how he ran that defense. And I do think, the Minnesota Vikings have a great defensive coordinator in their time this year. And I do think maybe with how the offense is playing right now, I do think they could have a potential playoff spot, if not a divisional title in the future this season.
Think so too. And D'Amico Ryans on the Houston side, he's done a great job leading the Texans. Obviously, he was the coach last season, and they did pretty good as well. What a scary moment during the Vikings game, though, for Sam Darnold. Towards the end of the game, it seemed like he got injured, but then he was able to bounce back, and everything was well. So, a scary moment for Vikings and the Vikings fans, especially with all the success that the Vikings have had this early into the season. But another upset took place, the Broncos and Buccaneers 26-7. Nobody really expected the Broncos to take down the Buccaneers after the success that they've had with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. They have been playing phenomenal, but the Broncos, they wanted a win with Bo Nix.
Yeah, and I think especially a game like this, I mean, Vita Vea wasn't playing. The run defense wasn't necessarily there. I mean, that's a huge loss for the Buccaneers run defense without Vita Vea. And it clearly showed because, I mean, the Broncos put up 136 yards against this Buccaneers defense. And that's quite a bit, especially Bo Nix almost running for 50 yards. And, seeing that Broncos defense or Broncos offense, I should say, getting something to click is especially something a lot of Bronco fans want to see because, I mean, especially last week with all the losses they sustained, I think a lot of people were losing hope that maybe Bo Nix wasn't the correct choice, but I think he's just trying to find his foot to put himself in the NFL and continue with what he was trying to do in college. And I think this was a big morale boost for that team to continue going forward and show, hey, like we're still developing, but we can still compete with other teams. And I mean, the Denver's defense is definitely an underrated team for that Denver defense. I mean, granted, you just lost Alex Singleton to an ACL tear, but a lot of that defense is still young. A lot of that defense is, inexperienced, but they do have a lot of good players. I mean, you still have Patrick Surtain who's on the team, and granted, he's probably one of the best corners in the NFL right now. And, going up to Mike Evans and keeping him to just 17 yards and no touchdown. I mean, that's something you want to see with that defense going forward. And being able to produce off that going into next week, I think this Bronco defense is definitely getting something going.
Yeah, for sure. And then with Bo Nix being able to score a touchdown, the game was actually in Tampa Bay, which you would think that they would have won, especially it being a home game. But like you said, the defense just wasn't on their game. They allowed Bo Nix to run in a touchdown, which is not like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. So a big win for the Broncos, and we're gonna have to see what happens next for them. Bo Nix, somebody that people should be watching out for. But moving on, the Los Angeles Rams and San Francisco 49ers, a huge upset, especially with the way that the 49ers played last season and then with all of their players on the team, 27-24. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, watching this game as a Cardinal fan gave me a lot of hope because really the only big team that we have in our way is Seattle, and I really don't feel like Seattle is that great of a team. But I mean, like looking at this game, there should have been no way the 49ers lost this game. I mean, you're up 14 nothing at the second quarter. You know, it really was one of those games where it was like you're 21-7 in the halfway through the third quarter, and you have Juan Jennings who had almost 200 yards and three touchdowns, and like that's something that you don't see in the NFL very much. I mean, especially with how injured this team is. I mean, you don't have Christian McCaffrey, you don't have Deebo Samuel, you don't have George Kittle. A lot of those key players that you need on the offense, and I really do think Brock Purdy had himself a redemption game kind of thing where he proved to everyone he doesn't need all these players to have a good game. I mean, granted, it does help him out a lot because everyone likes to have star players, but with Brock Purdy, I mean, he didn't throw any interceptions. He had three touchdowns, almost 300 passing yards against this Rams defense. And, you know, a lot of people say that the Rams team is very injured, but for the most part, that Rams defense is still very much intact. I mean, you still have the first round pick with Jared Verse, you have Toby Turner, you still have Iron Young. I mean, those players, especially with Braden Fisk, um, those players definitely create an impact on the line of scrimmage. And with Brock being able to see players with all the pressure coming his way, it really was something special for Brock Purdy to have that game. But, just unfortunate collapse in the fourth quarter where Matthew Stafford was able to come in and retake the lead from the Niners with just 2 seconds left in the game. And, it really does show that this Niner team is not what it was last year. And it does show that the Rams shouldn't be taken super lightly with all the injuries that they had, but it does give hope for, Seattle and Cardinal fans that the top two dogs in the division aren't really, healthy. They're not playing well. So it does give a lot of optimism for those teams. And, a lot of people are questioning, the 49ers training staff with, Brandon Staley and all that. So it really is a conversation that's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, for sure. And the next game, Washington Commanders and Cincinnati Bengals, 38 to 33. This one was an upset. People didn't really expect the Commanders to get out there and do what they did. The Bengals, obviously led by Joe Burrow. I feel like people hold the Bengals to a high standard because of their past with Joe Burrow and Joe Burrow's history being at LSU, winning the Heisman. And also, like, another thing to take into mind here, Jaden Daniels won a Heisman. So both quarterbacks, Heisman winners. So an interesting matchup, but the Commanders, as we know, have not been the best team in a long time. So to see them take down the Bengals, it was an unfamiliar sight.
Yeah, and as a Cardinal fan, seeing the Commanders with, Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator, it was shocking to see just how much they were able to get done against the Cincinnati Bengals. I mean, granted, the Bengals haven't played super well, like you mentioned. I mean, they also the Patriots week one, and then you go on to lose week two and against the Chiefs in a very close matchup. But just watching this team, I mean, it's not the same team that we saw a couple years ago when they were in the Super Bowl. I mean, the Commanders, I mean, we've seen Cliff Kingsbury and how he coaches. I mean, they're probably going to end up collapsing halfway towards the season as we continue to the end, but they have a really good quarterback in Jaden Daniels. And like you mentioned, Heisman winner, transferred out of ASU to LSU, and a lot of people who were ASU fans who watched him probably weren't thinking he was going to be a future top two pick in the NFL, but he's really come out, and I dare I say he probably will end up winning Rookie of the Year if he continues playing the way he does this last week. I mean, he's significantly ahead of Caleb Williams and where he's at with less weapons on his team. I mean, you have Terry McLaurin as his number one receiver, and then Zach Ertz is the number two receiver, which the Cardinals had last year, and they ended up releasing him for Trey McBride. So the team is a lot older than a lot of people think. But with that age, I mean, there's a lot of experience and a lot of wisdom that comes with those teams. So, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are trying to get Jaden Daniels adjusted to NFL speed, and it's really, really working. I mean, I'll give props to Cliff Kingsbury where it's at because he's done a great job developing him as a quarterback, but it's definitely going to be something to keep on alert because with Cliff's history of collapsing, I mean, are we going to see that with the Commanders where they go, maybe 9-4 and then collapse another 9-8 or whatever the case may be? But yeah, it'll be something to watch with Jaden Daniels.
And then the Cowboys heading into week 4, the Cowboys taking on the New York Giants, Thursday night football. Who are you taking for this one?
I'm gonna take the Cowboys. I do think that the Cowboys are a much better team, and I mean, granted, they haven't been playing to that potential. I mean, they almost came back and beat the Ravens last week, but it's one of those games where it's almost like a trap game for the Cowboys where they should win that game. But I mean, with Malik Neighbors going up against Trayvon Diggs, it's gonna be pretty cool matchup. Micah Parsons against Andrew Thomas, and continuing on with all of that, it really is. It's going to be a good game. But if the Cowboys don't blow out the Giants, it's going to leave some questions for the Cowboys' future with Mike McCarthy and all that going on with the team, and even with Jerry Jones and all the players that he wants to bring in for the future seasons. But Cowboys, I personally think the Cowboys should blow out the Giants.
Yeah, and something interesting about this game, the Cowboys usually on Thursday nights will play in their own stadium. They don't really ever travel, so it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of adapt to that. And I think I gotta go with the Cowboys. I mean, they're just too good of a team to lose to the Giants. I know the game's going to be in New York, but with Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and like you said, the defense with Micah Parsons, I really cannot see them losing to the Giants and Daniel Jones.
Everything with the Cowboys, I mean, they almost rallied back against the Ravens, like I said earlier, and the Giants beat the Browns, which I mean, props to both of those teams. It's something that, both those teams needed. And it's kind of funny to think about, but both the Cowboys and Giants' sole win in the season right now is against the Browns. So, I mean, that tells you how much you need to know about the Cleveland Browns that season going forward. But anyways, to start off Sunday morning, we have the Saints taking on the Falcons, a divisional game in the NFC South. Falcons almost beat the Chiefs this last week. I feel like close games with the Chiefs have always like come somehow roll out in the Chiefs' favor, but Falcons almost beat the Chiefs. They had a game-winning drive against the Eagles week 2, just that, and then the Saints. They started off super strong, winning 2 games out of the gate and barely losing to the Eagles this last week. But I am gonna take the Saints. It's one of those things where I feel like the offense is more intact than the Falcons' offense. I mean, granted, it could go either way. But when it comes down to defense, I do think the Saints have a better defense. Defensive line, defensive linebackers, whatever the case may be. I mean, granted, you still have Jesse Bates and you still have Justin Simmons and all. You have Matthew Judon. So I mean, the Falcons' defense is definitely there, but I just think the Saints have more put together, but I wouldn't be shocked if it came down to like the Falcons winning the game with Young Wei Koo kicking a field goal or whatever the case may be. It really is going to be a close game. Like I said, it's every week. Divisional matchups are always, super close because they always want to prove a point. But I do think the Saints are going to walk away with this one. I think maybe if they play later on again next week, or later on in the season, I think the Falcons will end up beating them there. But I think the Saints are going to take this one.
Yeah, I really, really, really hope that I'm not going to be let down here because I'm trusting in Kirk Cousins to get it done. I don't know. The Saints are just a good team. We've seen what they can do. They're high scoring games, just incredible with Derek Carr. But I don't know. Something about this game is just kind of making me lean towards Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. So I don't know. I gotta go with Kirk Cousins and the Falcons. I just think that they're gonna be able to get it done in their stadium.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's going to rely on and if Alvin Kamara plays. I mean, Alvin Kamara is a huge part of that Saints offense. I mean, we've seen it. He can catch the ball, he can run the ball. He makes up for a lot of ground for that team. But I just feel like the Saints are more intact. But it's going to be a good game either way, regardless of who wins and who loses. So that'll be a good game to open up this week with the Sunday morning games. Going on, we have the Bengals meeting the Panthers. Wouldn't it just be funny if Andy Dalton beat the Bengals as a Panthers? I
If
really,
if the Panthers beat the Bengals, there's a serious problem. Obviously Andy Dalton came in and led them to a win last week, but against the Bengals, I mean, the Bengals haven't won any games this season. I really think that this will be their week.
and it should be their week. I mean, this is almost like a no-brainer for the Bengals to win a game. I mean, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is finally healthy. Zachary Moss is finally getting something going. Joe Burrow. I mean, Panthers really don't have a defense, and they still managed to blow out the Raiders last week. And Andy Dalton, only quarterback so far to throw 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in a single game. But you don't want to see the Panthers beat the Bengals, but it's a real possibility at this point because like the Bengals are 0-3 and like they face some not so great teams, and now you're facing another not so great team. And this is going to be one of those games where, it's a trap game that the Bengals end up losing. I mean, I could see it, but like the Bengals should win this game. And I want to go with the Bengals, but part of me is thinking that the Panthers are going to upset the Bengals this week. I think it just comes down to the Bengals defense. And granted, the Bengals defense isn't that great, but it's still a lot better than some of these other teams that have won games. For instance, the Panthers. It's going to be a conversation that's going to be had with Zachary Taylor. Like, how are you going to progress and move on from this game, or are we going to have to look for a new head coach for this job because something just isn't clicking now?
Well, I don't know, but we'll have to see what happens in that game. Obviously, it's come to a toss up between two terrible teams. Now, moving on, the Los Angeles Rams and the Bears. I don't know which one honestly, I got to go with the Rams just cuz Stafford has more experience and then Caleb Williams has not been playing that well lately. So, I am rolling with the Rams. I know the game will be in Chicago, but I think that the Rams are a better team overall.
I'm actually gonna go with the Bears. I mean, I like what you said about Matthew Stafford and being able to have that experience and knowing how to, encourage your receivers and your linemen and stuff like that we saw against the 49ers, but defense is where the liability is. I mean, especially the secondary and the linebacker core. I mean, the front seven with, Bryce Young, Jared Verse, Brendan Fisk, and Kobe Turner. Like that defensive line is really, really good. And I don't think the Bears are going to have a big running game, especially because DeAndre Swift just isn't that great of a running back. But looking at the receiver yards, I mean, they get killed in the passing game. And we've seen that week after week after week. I mean, we saw it with the Cardinals, we saw it with the 49ers, we saw it with the Lions. And I do think that secondary is a liability for this Chicago for the Lions against the Chicago Bears. And they have DJ Moore, they have Roma Dunze, they could possibly have Keenan Allen, depending on if he comes back healthy this week or not with practice. But that's a really big passing game that the Bears have. And I think if Caleb Williams can start clicking, especially in this game, and making some plays when the pocket collapse, I do think the Bears are going to able to pull out a victory for that game. And the Bears defense especially is a team that you don't want to mess around with. I mean, we've seen them win games against the Titans, keep it close against the Texans, and then, keep it close against the Colts. But I do think that the Bears are going to end up pulling off a win against the Rams, whether it be their defensive side of the ball, the receivers, or whatever the case may be. But I do think the Bears are going to pull an upset against the Rams.
I could see that happening, but okay, moving on, the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, Jordan Love is back, and then the Vikings with Sam Darnold and then Justin Jefferson. It's going to be an interesting game. The Vikings are really good, as we've seen early on in the season. They have not lost a game. Could this be the one where they lose? I don't think so. I don't see it happening, but they have to fall at some point. I have to go with the Vikings.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Vikings too. Like I mentioned earlier, Brian Flores, he's a masterclass defensive scheme coach. He knows what he's going up against with Jordan Love. He knows what he's going up against with Josh Jacobs and all those offensive weapons that the Packers have. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, defense divisional games are always super, super close. I think this is one of the bigger games for this division, especially because these two teams are probably going to end up being one of the teams that has to face the Lions for a division title. But I do think the Vikings are going to end up taking this game from the Packers. Sam Darnold leads the league in touchdowns. He's been playing out of his mind recently. And you have Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson. I think you have Jordan Addison coming back from concussion, I believe. But I think the Vikings will end up beating the Packers. And I think it'll be a hard game just because it's at Lambeau Field. I mean, every game at Lambeau Field's hard to play, and especially with the fan base that the Packers have. But, you know, seeing how the Vikings have played against teams so far, and not just against, mediocre teams, like really good teams, I do think, they're going to scare Jordan Love a little bit. They can apply pressure within seconds. They can sack him. I think he might be scared to take a hit, especially after spreading his MCL week one. I mean, coming back from an MCL sprain, it's something you don't want to go through again because it really does suck. You don't have a lot of mobility and, it hurts to do different things. But, Jordan Love, I think he'll come out and perform, but I think he'll be slightly nervous going against this Vikings defensive line.
Yeah, I think so too. The Vikings, obviously a great team. But moving on, a team that isn't so great, the Jacksonville Jaguars, they won no games. They've lost three. The Houston Texans lost one, so they won two. Um, you know, coming into the season, I think a lot of people had, I don't want to say high hopes, but they had hopes for Jacksonville, especially with Trevor Lawrence, who we know what he's capable of, and we've seen him perform at a, I don't know if I would say high level, but a good level. So weird that they have not won one game. A horrendous loss the other night for them. Um, but anyways, I have to take the Texans. They just have an offensive powerhouse roster, and the Jags, they are just not good. Everything about them is just not good. Their defense is not good. Trevor Lawrence is not good. And then Mac Jones, who came in during their last game, is not good. So everything in me is saying that the Texans are going to win this.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, I mean, the Jaguars haven't been playing to the potential that they should have been playing. I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence has taken huge regression and huge steps back from where he was, a couple years ago, where he's taken this team to, the playoffs and keeping it close against a lot of these teams. But man, I mean, he has just really, really fallen off since last year. And, you know, especially with this Texans team, I mean, you're gonna have Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs as a new weapon. Joe Mixon might be back depending on if he is able to go with practice this week. Tank Dell is also questionable this week, and he might not play. But with the defense, like I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's one of those things where if you don't come out to play in this divisional game, you're gonna end up losing. And we've seen the Jaguars play against teams. I mean, it really has not been a good team so far. I mean, a lot of the Jaguars games have been blowouts. I mean, you see it and you just question, you're like, what's going on with this Jaguars team? Like, is it Doug Peterson? Is it offensive schemes? Is it whatever the case may be? I mean, they blew a lead against the Dolphins week one, they blew a lead against the Browns week two, they get blown out against the Bills. So it's one of those things where you question what's going on with this team and is it going to get better anytime soon? But I don't think they're going to beat the Texans this week. I think the Texans are going to beat them by a touchdown. I think, with CJ Stroud losing the game that he did this last week, I think he's going to want to bounce back and show that he can still do what he does with the team of weapons that he has.
Thing that we should mention, Doug Peterson, could he be on the hot seat? I think he can be. That loss the other night was just not good at all. That was an embarrassment.
It wasn't even embarrassment. It was just flat out just humiliating. I mean, you go out there and you want to prove yourself that you can keep up with the contending team. You go out and get blown out before halftime, and then it's like not even a game. You throw Mac Jones in just to see what he can do, and he actually did pretty decent for the little bit that he played. So now you have to wonder: is Trevor Lawrence going to even be the starting quarterback when Max Jones, if he outperforms him? And, Trevor Lawrence just got a huge contract at the beginning of this offseason, and Mac Jones looks like he might, maybe it's a little too early of panic mode, but there is some possibility that Mac Jones could eventually take Trevor Lawrence's starting position from him as a Jaguar. And that's really that really could be a reality for them. Maybe something will change. Maybe, offensive coordinator will get something readjusted. Maybe some people will get fired. They'll bring in some new coaches to fix some situations. But yeah, I mean, they have to get it turned around really quickly or it's going to be a disaster year for them.
Moving on, the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Colts. I am rolling with the Steelers. I think that their defense is too good for the Colts, and the Colts obviously have not done a good job this season. They've lost two games, won one. The Steelers have lost none, which is a surprise. A lot of people, I think, heading into the season didn't think that they were going to be that great. And then obviously there was some question as to whether Russell Wilson or Justin Fields would be the starting quarterback. Justin Fields has been their primary quarterback, and he's done a great job lately. So I am gonna have to go with the Steelers, and, you know, I cheer for Anthony Richardson because I think that he has a lot of potential of being great, and we talked about this earlier, but the Colts, somehow, they just kind of fell apart.
Yeah, and it's really concerning just watching him play. I mean, like I mentioned, his accuracy is the big issue with Anthony Richardson. I mean, he has the power to sling the ball 70 yards downfield. He can take off. He knows like how to avoid tackles. He knows how to take hits, this and that. And it's something you want to see from a scrambling quarterback, but with the accuracy of Anthony Richardson, it's really something that is a little concerning with quarterback, especially at that position with the Colts. Justin Fields has been playing super well, and I think a lot of the reason that Russell Wilson hasn't gotten the chance to play, excluding the injury, is that Justin Fields has been winning games, and he's been building a relationship with the team. And I think Mike Tomlin came out earlier this week and said if he beats the Colts this week, I think he's going to remain the starter the rest of the year. And honestly, I think a lot of Steeler fans are really excited about that happening just because, a lot of Steeler fans thought Justin Fields was going to be the future of that franchise. They thought, Russell Wilson was going to come in, teach Justin Fields some tricks here and there, what to look out for. I mean, kind of like a mentor for Justin Fields. And for him to just be able to start out and continue on this win streak of going 3-0, I think it's going to be a really, really great game for Justin Fields to lock himself as a potential starter for the future for the Steelers. And, obviously they're not going to have Alex Highsmith, who went out with a groin injury. He's going to be out for a couple weeks, but it's going to be one of those games where the Steelers are going to put something together and blow the Colts right out of the water and just keep going forward, continuing on with their winning streak.
Okay, moving on, the Denver Broncos taking on the New York Jets. So 2 games this week taking place in New York at MetLife Stadium. The team I am taking, I think I'm gonna have to go with the Jets just because they have Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall. They have a lot of great players, and not only do they have great players, but Aaron Rodgers and his knowledge that he carries with him, I think just gives them the advantage because obviously he's a veteran quarterback, been in the league a long time. He knows what it's like to be in Bo Nix's position. And the Broncos have not proved anything, even though they took down the Buccaneers last week.
And, I mean, I would be shocked if, the Jets blew out the Broncos. I do think the Broncos have some potential to hold the Jets to a close game. I mean, granted, Bo Nix, passing wise hasn't been super great, but I think this Jets team struggles a lot with quarterbacks that are very mobile. I mean, we saw it with the 49ers, we saw it with the Titans. Last week we didn't see it because Jacoby Brissett really isn't that much of a scrambling quarterback, and they don't have that great of a receiver core. But I would be shocked if the Jets blew the Broncos out just because, it's it's still a developing team. I mean, they still have a great defense. I mean, granted, Alex Singleton isn't going to be there like I mentioned earlier, but I do think the Broncos are going to be a little bit of a shocker for a lot of people this week in keeping it close with the Jets. And I do think that, the Broncos have a chance to beat the Jets, but I do think, Aaron Rodgers, he's been in the position before. He's going to somehow pull out a win against the Broncos. But like I said, I wouldn't be shocked if it was a close game from start to finish with this team.
The thing about the Jets is they have big names on their team, a lot of talent, but they are not playing to their full potential. And when they click, I think it's going to be really scary. And every team goes through a peak. Just when is it going to be? Nobody knows. But when they do, I think they're obviously going to be a great team. Okay, moving on, the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. So 2 games back to back at home for the Buccaneers. Obviously, lost their last one to the Broncos. But, you know, obviously the Eagles with Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley and a lot of talent on their side. Nick Sirianni leading them. I still, for some reason and some part of me, I think that Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers will be able to take the win over the Eagles. And maybe there's a little bit of leftover biasy here, but I think that the Buccaneers are on track and Baker Mayfield has been leading them phenomenally.
Yeah, and it's gonna be a close game. I think really what it comes down to is if Vita Vea plays this week for the Buccaneers. If he doesn't, Saquon Barkley's gonna run all over the Buccaneers defense. I mean, we saw it last week with the Broncos. Broncos literally just ran over the Buccaneers all game long. And, Hurts is a great pocket passer, but when it comes to receivers, you don't have AJ Brown. You don't have Devonta Smith with the concussion. So now you're left with, third and fourth string receivers with Dallas Goedert. And, I think a lot of Eagle fans don't want to see Jalen Hurts throwing the ball that much, especially against this Buccaneers defense. So I think they're going to stick a lot of the time with running the ball either with Hurts, whether with Saquon, with uh Gaineswell or whoever else they have on the team. But I do think the Eagles are going to run the ball heavy this game. But like I said, if Vita does not play, it's going to be a long game for the Buccaneers. And the Eagles defense is definitely not a unit you want to mess around with, especially with the corners that they have. And granted, Darius Slay is kind of regressing a little bit. James Bradbury is completely out of the water. And then you have Quentin Mitchell, who's solid for the Eagles so far. So I wouldn't expect the Eagles to, you know, keep up with this team. But like you mentioned, I think the Buccaneers are gonna walk away with the win this game. But it's gonna be one of those games where it's super close just because Saquon Barkley is gonna be Saquon Barkley and make moves wherever he can. But the Buccaneers offense, I think, is just gonna be too much for this Eagles defense going into the game.
And like you mentioned, I think in order for the Buccaneers to walk away with the win, they're going to need some huge defensive plays happening. Vita Vea, hopefully, for their sake, will be playing. And another one here in Arizona, 2 games for the Cardinals in their home stadium, back-to-back weeks. Last week, obviously, faced off against the Lions and fell short. You were actually at that game, and you're going to be at this one this weekend. So exciting. I really hope that the Cardinals can pull off the win, especially being from Arizona. You got to cheer for the home team. So I don't know. Both teams have proven themselves as good teams. Obviously, the Cardinals 1-2, except last week a close one with the Lions. So it's going to be a close game, I think. As much as I want the Cardinals to walk away with the win, I think that right now, in the last game where we saw the Commanders take down the Bengals, it looked like everything was going right for them. And Jaden Daniels, it seems like, has found his, I don't want to say rhythm because it's still too early for that, but it seems like he has adjusted enough into the NFL, even though it's very early, and with his team. So a good bond there with the Commanders is what it seems like. So I don't know. I think I have to go with the Commanders. I hope I regret it.
That hurts a little bit. Watching the Cardinals play, I mean, you keep it a one possession game against the Bills, you blow out the Rams, you keep it a one possession game against the Lions. I mean, the Bills and the Lions are always playoff teams. I mean, especially last year. I mean, the Lions went to the NFC Championship game, so it's always great to see the Cardinals keep it close with a really good team. But, watching the game, you always hate to see the Cardinals just not be able to pull it through in games that they can win. I mean, they could have beat the Bills, they could have beat the Lions, but they just couldn't get something to click. And especially this game. I mean, Cliff Kingsbury is their offensive coordinator for the Commanders. I mean, do you know how much satisfaction it would be for Cardinal fans, especially for Kyler Murray to beat Cliff Kingsbury at home?
One thing that you have to remember, though, is that Cliff Kingsbury knows how Kyler Murray works, and I think that he knows what will put him under pressure. And I don't know. I hope the Cardinals can win. I hope they can. but something is just kind of leading me to think that the Commanders are going to be going home with the win.
Here's the thing, and you bring up a good point with him knowing Kyler Murray. Who do they have on defense to stop Kyler Murray? They really don't have anyone that I can think of. Their secondary is sucks. Their edge rushers suck. Their defensive tackles are great, are amazing. They're always going to be great. Their linebackers are decent. Bobby Wagner is really the only person that is worth anything on that linebacker core. But I don't think the Commanders can really stop Kyler Murray. I mean, granted, it's going to be harder because Zach Ertz isn't going to be on the. I mean, not Zach Ertz. I think it's going to be harder for the Cardinals because Trey McBride's not going to be on the field. But I can't see the Commanders stopping Kyler Murray. It's going to be like the Rams game where they go out of the gate and just start controlling the game before halftime. But I think the thing that conflicts me the most is how is the Cardinals defense going to contain Jaden Daniels? I mean, he's like Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's putting up Lamar Jackson stats running the ball against the Bengals last week, but he had one of the best accuracy games for a quarterback in his rookie year ever. I mean, he put up 91.3 percentage passing completion, and a lot of times that I watch the Cardinal games, especially against scrambling quarterbacks, it's always hard to contain those quarterbacks. The Cardinals just lost Justin Jones, so the run game isn't going to be super great against that Commanders team. But if the Cardinals defense plays the way they did in the second half of the Lions game, I do think the Commanders will get blown out before the second half. But it really depends on how Jaden Daniel plays. It depends on the calls that Cliff Kingsbury calls. I know Nick Rallis was talking to Kyler Murray about how Cliff Kingsbury plays, and that's something as a defensive coordinator that you want to have is, hey, how does he play? How does he coach you? How does he do this? How does he do that? Because it gets more insight with Nick Rallis. Like, okay, this is what he's teaching Jaden Daniels. How can we put that pressure on Dane Daniels to make errant throws to turn the ball over? Because right now, Dane Daniels is really the only quarterback that I can think of at the top of my head who hasn't had a turnover at all this season. I mean, the last time they punted the ball was in the middle of the week 1 game, and that's it. They didn't punt at all week 2. They didn't punt at all week 3. They didn't turn over the ball at all. And it's going to be one of those games that it's going to be close for the Cardinals if they can't get things clicking. But if they can get things clicking right off the gate, I think the Cardinals will blow the Commanders out.
Hope so. But anyways, moving on, the New England Patriots taking on the San Francisco 49ers. And what a crazy sight here that in the 2024 NFL season, the Patriots and 49ers have the same record. 1-2 for both of them. Um, Obviously, the 49ers, a great team. They made it to the Super Bowl last season, but now they have a lot of injuries and they're not the same team. So, do you think that the Patriots could pull off a win? The 49ers obviously lost last week to the Rams. The 49ers are a good team, but I don't think that they could lose 2 weeks in a row. But I don't know, I gotta go with the 49ers just because they have the advantage here, especially playing in their own stadium. Um, but the Patriots, they just are not that great. So I'm going with the 49ers.
You look at Nick Bosa, you look at Fred Warner. I think they're going to have Kufunga back. They're going to have, Javon Hargrave, who just went out with a bicep tear, so he's going to be out for the season. But they still have that defensive core they can work around and, contain the run game, contain the pass game. I don't think the Patriots have a chance against this 49ers team. And, a lot of people give credit to Christian Gonzalez. And granted, he's a good corner, but if you're putting him on Brandon Ayuk or Juwan Jennings, it's going to be a hard game for him because it's one of those games where one of those two players are going to have a breakout game. And I think after the game that Juwan Jennings had this last week against the Rams, I think the Patriots are going to focus more on Juwan Jennings and have Christian Gonzalez more one-on-one against Brandon Ayuk. And I do think Brandon Ayuk's going to have more targets. Hopefully he'll have more catches and not 6 drops like the 49ers had last week. But if the defense can hold up, they'll be okay. And the 49ers offense isn't terrible. It's not as great as it has been, but it's still better than the Patriots offense where it's at right now. So I have the 49ers winning, I would say by at least 10 points.
Yeah, you mentioned a good point with the defense. Fred Warner, just a beast. The Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, I'm going with the Chiefs. But at the same time, they have to fall at some point, which, I don't know. People say that, including myself, as you just heard it, but there has been teams who have gone the entire season with a perfect season, but I don't know. I'm rolling with the Chiefs here, but it's only a matter of time, I think, that team to lose.
Yeah, and I think the Chiefs will end up losing some game in the future. But, the Chargers are just too injured. They have a lot of people not playing this week. I mean, Derwin James just got suspended this week. Joey Bosa might not play this week. Justin Herbert re-aggravated his ankle, so he's probably not going to play this week. Joe Alt might be out for a couple weeks. So the Chargers team is just no shape to keep up with this Chiefs offense or this Chiefs defense and, keep producing with what the Chiefs offense is producing. But I do think the Chiefs are going to win the game, but like I said, division games are always tough. I mean, we've seen the Chargers upset the Chiefs multiple times, and seeing how the team has played so far, I wouldn't be shocked if it was a close game for the Chiefs, but I do think the Chiefs pull out a win here.
Moving on, Cleveland Browns taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. You mentioned earlier the Browns look terrible. I think I have to go with the Raiders here. Max Crosby, I think, is just going to bring the pressure against Deshaun Watson. And the Raiders just have more playmakers, Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers. And then they have Gardner Minshew, which isn't a great quarterback, but he can get the job done.
Yeah, and this Raiders team has really impressed a lot of people. I mean, they beat the Ravens. I mean, that's a tough team to even play in the first place. But they get blown out by the Raiders. I think that was kind of a wake up call for them. Like we need to really get something together, or we're not going to be good at all. And I think especially with the Browns this week. I mean, there's a chance that Miles Garrett might not even play for the Browns, which would be a tremendous loss for that Browns defense. And Deshaun Watson not playing the way he's played when he was a Houston Texan. I mean, it's one of those games where like it should be a Browns victory, but I think everyone knows that the Raiders are going to end up somehow taking this game away from the Browns, and that the Browns will be able to, not get anything going against the Raiders defense. Max Crosby, like you mentioned, is going to be a lethal force against that Browns offensive line. I mean, the whole offensive line is young; they're inexperienced going against a top DPOI player. It's definitely going to be something for Raiders fans to look forward to with Max Crosby having a heyday against Deshaun Watson. And who knows? Maybe some Browns fans are hoping that Max Crosby hurts Deshaun Watson with how he's been playing. I mean, you don't know how the Browns fans act. They get crazy with their antics and stuff like that. But yeah, Raiders should take this game from the Browns and move on to 2-2.
Okay, moving on, we have the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens. This game will be taking place in Baltimore. I think it's going to be a great game. And I think that the Ravens will probably walk away with the win. I mentioned earlier teams have to fall apart at some point. Obviously, the Bills are on top right now. Josh Allen in the MVP conversation, even though it's very early on into the season. But I don't know. I got to go with the Ravens. They have a great team, Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, but the Bills defense also is good. So I don't know. I could go back and forth on this one all day long, but I gotta go with the Ravens.
I said it last week, and I still didn't back up my talk. The Bills have astonished me with how they've been playing, and a huge blowout win against the Jaguars. I mean, I can't doubt them anymore. I think the Bills are going to take this game against the Ravens. I mean, on paper, the Bills don't look great, but man, the chemistry that they have together, it's something that the Bills haven't seen in quite a long time. And with all the players that they have on cheap deals and being able to revolve around Josh Allen and James Cook, I mean, they really are a great team. And the defense for the Bills, I mean, they've been playing great against the run, against the pass, whatever is up in front of them, they're ready for the challenge. So I do think the Bills will defeat the Ravens. And the Ravens, they had their bounce back against the Cowboys and they almost lost it in the fourth quarter. So I think, the Ravens are good, but are they consistent? I don't think so. I think the Bills are going to beat them by a field goal at least, and
Yeah,
I think it'll be a close game. But I do think the Bills are going to pull out still undefeated.
it's interesting that you say that. Um, the Bills just have been playing really good. The Ravens, obviously, they lost to the Raiders, so very inconsistent, but I don't know. Everybody is on the same page on the Bills. So their team chemistry, like you mentioned, is doing really good right now. And if you have good chemistry, you're going to be good. That's just the end of the story there. Anyways, moving on, the Tennessee Titans taking on the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, the Dolphins without Tua Tagovailoa after a head injury. It was a tough one. People didn't know if he was going to come back into the NFL. Right now, he's on the IR list. So, um, it's going to be a close game. Um, I think both teams are pretty level right now. I mean, I don't know. Like the Dolphins have good receivers and they have a good offense, but I don't know. You can't make plays if you don't have a good quarterback. So that's their situation right now. I have to go with Tennessee.
I think both teams are in that predicament where both quarterbacks have to make plays to get something going, and you know, Will Levis has been playing not the greatest. I mean, he has the most turnovers in the league, so that tells you something. And every week we get some new picture of him somehow turning over the ball in the weirdest fashion. But I don't know. I mean, you have Tim Boyle starting for the Dolphins. I mean, he's never been great. You have Will Levis, who never has been super, super great, but he's able to make things happen. But like I said, I think the Dolphins defense is just a lot better than the Titans offense. I mean, granted, we saw DeAndre Hopkins get somewhat of his old form back playing against, but just the way they played against that team, it was something that I think Titan fans are really excited to see how DeAndre Hopkins did. And for them to continue going on to play the way they did against the Packers, I mean, it was kind of a slugfest. The offense with rushing attack wasn't there, so it was a lot of passing the ball. But I do think the Dolphins are going to walk out victorious. I mean, their rush defense has been super great, with Calais Campbell and, with Jalen Phillips and all that. And, the passing attack with Jalen Ramsey and what they have going on there. I think the Dolphins will end up taking the win from there and having the Titans going 0-4.
Yeah. But anyways, moving on, the Seattle Seahawks, which important to mention, two games on Monday night. So the Titans taking on the Dolphins, and then the Seahawks are going to be taking on the Lions. I have to go with the Lions. We mentioned earlier the Seahawks look good right now, but I think it's hard to go against the Lions, especially with Aiden Hutchinson and Amon-Ra St. Brown and David Montgomery. As soon as David Montgomery gets going, the entire offense gets going. So Dan Campbell, a great coach. Everything about the Lions is just looking good right now.
Yeah, and like I said the past prior weeks, Seattle really hasn't played an actual team. I think this is the first actual team that they will play. And I think they're gonna humble Seattle really quickly in this game. And a lot of it revolves on Seattle's run game. The Lions have one of the best run defenses in the NFL from last year, and I think they have the best rush defense this year in the NFL. I mean, every game that they've played with a running attack, they've just absolutely destroyed the run game. But their one loss came against a heavy passing attack team with the Buccaneers. And I don't think Geno Smith is that great of a quarterback to be passing the ball to players like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, and watching him play. I mean, he relies a lot on the rushing attack, and I feel like without that rushing attack presence, I feel like he's going to be in a world of trouble against this Lions defense. So I have the Lions handing Seattle their first loss of the season and showing Seattle that they really aren't that great of a team. They've just played some easy teams here and there.
But moving on from the NFL, it's going to be a fun week. Heading into week 4, I think that we kind of are getting an idea as to which teams are good, which teams are flukes, which teams are not good. So it's been a lot of fun these last few weeks as we adjust to all the changes that took place during the offseason. Moving on from the NFL, heading into Major League Baseball, Shohei Ohtani, obviously 50-50, 50 home runs, 50 stolen bases, the first person to ever do it. So a generational player, and I just saw something. His ball, the home run ball from his 50th home run, could be sold for $4.5 million. But it's on an auction right now. It could be sold for that amount, but currently it is on an auction. I think right now the price is at 400,000. So, Tyler, if you had the money, would you buy it?
Absolutely not. It's this is my opinion. I'm a D-backs fan. It's a baseball. It's not signed. Granted, it's history. Um, but like it's one of those things where it's like you have a baseball, like you could honestly just lie to anyone and be like, "Oh, this is the baseball." And everyone would be like, "Oh, wow, really?" I don't know. It's not signed. It's not, there's nothing showing that it's the 50-50 ball. But I do think it's really cool to have something like that. Me personally, I wouldn't have that ball just because there's no significance for me behind it. I mean, it's awesome to see Shohei become the first MLB player to ever do that because I think it sets up a whole new generation to want to join that 50-50 club. But, I just couldn't care less about a 50-50 ball. I mean, I know there's people out there, Dodger fans, and, people who are huge fans of Shohei Ohtani that want to get their hand on this ball, but it wouldn't matter. If it was up to me, I would have just given it back to the Dodgers and Shohei Ohtani for what it was.
Moving on to the Oakland A's, fans have been ripping the chairs out of the floor. And as crazy as it sounds, it's been happening. They want to take a piece of the stadium home with them before the team relocates in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because they're not going to have a stadium for the next couple of years, so they're ending up playing in Sacramento in a AAA team field. But we've seen the proposed plans and the the pictures of what the stadium's gonna look like, and it looks really cool. I mean, Vegas is gonna have a really cool stadium for the Oakland A's. I mean, it's sad for the Oakland A's to end up leaving Oakland. I think a lot of fans are upset about, the ownership and how things were handled and stuff like that. I mean, the A's have probably one of the biggest MLB fan bases in the MLB, but with terrible ownership, terrible management, and stuff like that. I think a lot of fans left. And when they came out and they said they're leaving, I think a lot of fans were really pissed off about the whole situation just because A's have been there for so many years.
Yeah, for sure. And then the new stadium obviously going to be expensive, 1.5 billion to build it, so you can only imagine what it's going to look like. A great thing for Vegas after having the Raiders move there from Oakland as well. But great things coming to Vegas for sports fans. Now, moving on, the Arizona Diamondbacks as we head into October. Obviously, the playoffs are going to get started shortly, and the Diamondbacks looked like they were just incredible for a little while. And obviously last season they made it to the World Series, and there was some talk earlier on in the season as to if they can make it, and Ketel Marte will be MVP, and a lot of things that were great about the Diamondbacks. But now the question is, will they even make it into the playoffs? What are you thinking about this?
You know, watching the D-backs play when they played after the All-Star break, it was really amazing to see how quickly the team was able to jump back on track the postseason because they weren't even projected to make the postseason after the All-Star break. But, they went on a huge winning streak. They lost some tough games here and there, but I don't think they're gonna make the playoffs. I mean, you play the Giants this week, and you play the Padres in the last 3 games of your season, and those are some tough games. And I mean, the Braves, they play the Mets and they play the Royals, and then the Mets play, the Braves, and then they end up playing the Brewers. And, all those there's one of those teams isn't gonna make it. The Braves aren't gonna make it, the D-backs aren't gonna make it, the Mets aren't gonna make it, whoever makes it. But it's gonna be one of those games where the D-backs have to win at least 2 of those games to at least secure a spot because it's gonna come down to whatever happens, happens. And, the Braves could lose to the Royals. The Mets could lose to the Brewers. Either team could get swept by either of those teams. We could get swept by the Padres and be out of the playoffs, depending on who wins and who loses. But I, it's one of those conflicting things where it's like anything can happen in baseball, and we see it all the time. I mean, teams are down so many points, they come back in one inning and win the game. But I hope Corey Lavello can get something going in these last 3 games and say, "Hey, we're here. Let's get it going, and let's go for the playoffs and for the World Series again." Because that would be something D-back fans would be really ecstatic over.
Yeah, for sure. And I really hope that they can make it again because obviously Arizona sports not always that great, and being able to just see them go all the way to the World Series even if they didn't win last year, it was amazing. And I just think Torey Lavello has done a great job being their manager. The team that they have, they're a good team, and I think that they deserve to make it into the playoffs. So hopefully they can win and clinch a spot. It's going to be interesting to see if they can do it. As we mentioned, they went on a hot streak, and the thing about it is that we know they're capable of doing it. So it's just upsetting if they don't do it.
Yeah, and I mean, you and me, we both gone to a couple of games with the D-backs and how they performed, and seeing how they are now, it's just super disappointing to see that they are now half a game out from being out of the wild card. But I think Torey Lovullo can pull something together, especially now that, Ketel Marte's back, especially with Christian Walker being back, Gabriel Moreno being back. I think a lot of the key players being back is gonna help this team out. But like we saw last night, I mean, they got blown out 11-0 against the Giants, and that's something you don't wanna see, losing to a team that's already out of the playoffs. But, you know, it's one of those games where, you know, like I said, anything can happen, and unfortunately, the D-backs could potentially not have a chance to make the playoffs at all after rallying and almost coming back to win the game or almost coming back to make the postseason.
Yeah, for sure. And that's not the only thing being talked about in Arizona, or even across the nation. And there's another thing happening in Arizona. Diana Taurasi might be playing her last game ever tonight. The Phoenix Mercury going to take on the Minnesota Lynx in Minnesota, game 2 of the playoffs. Usually, it's the best of 2 when it comes to WNBA playoffs. So if Minnesota loses tonight, the Phoenix Mercury will be bringing the series back to Phoenix. And if the Lynx win tonight, Phoenix, it's over for them. Their season's over. So the big question that has been being asked for the last few weeks, and that we've been kind of keeping our eye on for the last few weeks, is whether or not Diana Taurasi will retire. Now, last week, I went to the game here in Phoenix. Gino Ariema, Taurasi's UConn coach, was there. Sue Bird, Megan Rapinoe, Corey Gaines, her parents, her sister, they were all in attendance. And not only were they in attendance, but they were selling jerseys in the team's shop with a goat logo on them. They passed out Taurasi bobbleheads. They put t-shirts on the chairs with a letter that Penny Taylor Brittany Griner, her sister, all of them wrote to her. It was on the shirt. So, anyways, it just seems like everything is pointing towards this being her last season. I know a lot of people have been talking about it, obviously, with her being a 6-time Olympic gold medalist, 3-time WNBA champion, the WNBA's all time leading scorer, and an 11-time All Star. Now, the list goes on. That's just a few of her accomplishments. And at the last game in Phoenix, she took the microphone after the game and had a speech. And she ended the speech by saying, "If this is the last time, it felt like the first time," and did a similar gesture that Kobe Bryant did when he retired. Put the microphone down on the center of the court. Now, when Taurasi was younger, she looked up to Kobe Bryant. And she's been in the WNBA for 20 seasons. The WNBA has existed for 28. So a huge name for the WNBA, for women's sports, and for basketball in general. So a lot of question as to if she will be saying goodbye to the game of basketball tonight. Obviously, a huge part of her life, and she's made a huge difference for the sport. Do you think that this will be it?
Yes. And I know you have talked over and over that she is gonna be back. She's gonna, do it. She's gonna make some huge appearance. She's just doing this for like public stunt, but you have all this going on for Diana Taurasi. Granted, she's been playing really good, but it's at a point in her career where, does she really want to keep putting up with this? I mean, she still can play, she still can do this and that, but it's at the point where, it's like Kobe Bryant where you can still play. It's you choose if you want to or not. I mean, Diana, like you said, she has a family. She has a lot of people that mean a lot to her that are retired, doing their own things. And I think Diana looks a lot at this and is like, I'm missing a lot of what's going on because I'm playing basketball, and I've already accomplished so much. I mean, first 10,000 point player, all the Olympic gold medals, all the all-time leading scorer, the all-stars that she's accomplished, 3 championships and all that. She's done a lot for the Phoenix Mercury, and, I think this is one last hoorah to get her a championship before she retires, but I don't think, she's gonna come back for another season. And it's like Kobe Bryant, like I had mentioned earlier, where you have the potential to still play, but you're putting it up because, there's other things in life that mean more to you than a game. So as much as you hate me saying that, and as much as you want to doubt that Trusty is not going to retire, I do think this is it for her, and I will make sure whenever the retirement does get announced to put you on the spot right away to get your reaction on it.
Yeah, I have to agree with you, and I've been just trying to find every single possible way to say that it's not, but I think that it is. And the reason why I say that is because she's 42, as you mentioned. Why go out at your lowest when you can go out at your highest? And she won gold this season in the USA Olympics. First player, men or women, to win a gold medal 6 times in the sport of basketball. So a huge accomplishment for her, and a way to represent the state of Arizona and the USA. So she has accomplished a lot of things. Now, she also played in the All-Star game here in Phoenix. Now, the question is, why would she come back? Like, there's really no reason. And she has a family, she has 2 little kids, she has a son and a daughter. And I remember seeing her son, like, when he was a little baby. And then obviously her daughter, who was just born a few seasons ago, she's now walking. So time flies by. And being as successful as she has been, I don't see why she would keep going. And she should just go out on top. In this entire season, Penny Taylor, her wife, and her kids have been sitting courtside. So it just everything is pointing towards this is the end. She has mentioned before she doesn't like a lot of attention. She didn't want to do a farewell tour. Um, so, I do think this is it, especially because in the last game, the entire team came into the stadium walking in with Taurasi jerseys, and they've been posting pictures of things that look like a Taurasi retirement party. Obviously, there's been no announcement, but if they lose tonight, it's only a matter of time until we hear the announcement. In my opinion, if they win, great, but I think that this is the end.
And I think this is the end for her. And I think, everything that you just mentioned is going to show that Diana Taurasi is going to hang up, you know, and call it a career. I mean, she doesn't have anything to prove. She's already named herself as one of the best WNBA players to touch the game. And, a lot of people are going to look at her like a lot of people look at, Michael Jordan and Sue and, Larry Bird. I mean, her and Sue Bird were like the two legends that everyone looked up to when the WNBA started. And now that both of them are more than likely going to be retired, I think a lot of the new generation coming into the WNBA are going to look at them and be like, I want to be just like them. And, you know, like I mentioned, Diana has nothing to lose. She's already accomplished so much in her career. I mean, she can call it a quit whenever she wants and she still be on top of her game. And, with everything that's been going on and coming together the last couple weeks, it's looking at Diana Taurasi is going to play her last season.
Yeah, I agree with you. And no emotions other than happiness for her. It was a cool moment in the last game. Nika Moole, who plays for the Seattle Storm and also played at UConn, where Taurasi started her basketball career. She is a huge supporter of UConn and of where she came from, with Gino Ariema leading her and recruiting her and just kind of putting a story together for her. Now, anyways, in the last game, in the fourth quarter, so Taurasi scored her last points in the second quarter, and with 3 minutes 11 seconds on the clock, the fans of Phoenix started chanting DT. They wanted her to come back into the game one last time if it was in Phoenix for her. And when she came in, she was only in the game for 6 seconds when they brought her in. She didn't want to come in. I'm not really sure what that was about. I don't know the backstory. Anyways, when she did come in, she waved to Phoenix. She said, I love you guys. She went and gave Nika Mule a hug. Now, Nika Mule obviously plays for Seattle, but it just seemed like a passing the torch moment. It was really touching to see it. And also with Caitlin Clark coming into the league, um, I think that the WNBA is in good hands, and I think that Taurasi, it kind of makes me wonder because Taurasi and, like you mentioned, Sue Bird, pioneers of the sport, they basically made a name for it 8 years after it was created. And it just kind of makes you wonder if this was intentional, if she was staying until another great player came into the league to keep the attention on the game so that the attention wouldn't fall apart.
Yeah. And, you know, it's it looks like, especially just like everything you just mentioned. And I mean, there's really nothing you can really play for after accomplishing so much.
Yeah, for sure. So if this is it for Tarasi, the ending of an illustrious career, a great career, and me and you have met her in person, a great person. So all the happiness in the world to her and wishing nothing but the best to her in the future. And I'm sure whatever she chooses to do next, she will be successful at, whether it's be a commentator or just be